What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the Humm Baby Baseball channel. And today we got Jim from Ballcap Sports. We're going to talk about the second inning of baseball by Ken Burns, the documentary. We're going to jump into that. We've already done the first inning. That's going to be over on Ballcap Sports. So you might want to go check out that channel. This is a great channel. Got some good stuff over there talking baseball. But I'm going to go ahead and send it over to Jim because he's going to go ahead and recap the episode 2, inning 2, and then we're going to get into all the details. So you can go ahead.
Yes, let's do it. So inning 2, when we left off at the end of inning 1, baseball was in trouble. Too many leagues, gambling concerns, and a regular season that was viewed as irrelevant. Baseball needed stars to come and save the game. Inning 2, entitled Something Like a War, we're introduced to several of those stars. Right off the bat, we're introduced to Honus Wagner, a star in the Iron and Oil League. I tell you, some of the league names early on were fantastic. He joined the Pirates in 1900 and remained a fixture there for 18 years. Despite being badly bow-legged, he was fast. 700-plus steals for his career. And he was strong, big-chested, broad-shouldered, long arms. Over his career, he tallied 3,420 hits, led the league in batting average 8 times, scored over 1,700 runs, and drove in more than 1,700 runs. When his playing days were over, he held the record for games played, and that record stood for 4 decades. We also meet the Christian gentleman, Christy Mathewson, who would go on to win 373 games with a lifetime ERA of 2.13. Mathewson featured a fastball, a slow ball, a drop curve and out curve, rise ball, spit ball, the fall away, a hissing snake, a black cat, and the kitchen sink. Seriously, though, he was a masterful pitcher, and the fall away was perhaps his best pitch. We also meet the big train Walter Johnson, who would debut for Washington in 1907 after tearing up and here's another great league, the Idaho State League. Ty Cobb recounts his first at-bat against the big train, at first taunting him, but after the first pitch, which made him flinch, he knew he was facing an incredible pitcher. After facing Johnson, another batter recounted, "You can't hit what you can't see." Over his lifetime, Johnson would pitch 110 shutout, a record that still holds, win 417 games, win 20 or more 10 straight years, and strike out 3,500 batters. Perhaps the most important figure we're introduced to, though, is Ty Cobb. The title of this inning does come from one of his quotes, after all. He had a very demanding and unsatisfying father who told him when he left to play baseball to not come home a failure. Cobb took that, and it gave him his drive to prove himself. But while Cobb was away, his father was killed by his mother, who mistook him for a prowler. Cobb would never get over it. Having trouble making it, he forged letters of his performance and mailed them to a columnist who eventually wrote favorably of him, and that gave him his chance. Cobb's debut came in 1905 at the age of 19. He went on to log 4,189 hits, over 2,200 runs, 1,944 RBI, a 366 lifetime average, 12 batting titles, 7 in a row. Just amazing. Now, his animosity towards Black Americans cannot be overlooked. One black man tried to shake his hand after a game, and not only did Cobb slap at it, he chased him and assaulted him. When the man's wife came to defend her husband, Cobb turned to her as well. His teammates had to pull him off, and even then, he wanted to fight his own teammates. In a separate incident, Cobb also stabbed a black hotel night watchman. His entire life, he fought as though everyone was against him. We do have a brief moment where Branch Rickey re-enters the fold in a story of how during the first decade of the new century, Branch was coaching the Ohio Wesleyan baseball team to help pay school bills. When the team stopped to stay at a hotel in Indiana, the manager of the hotel wouldn't allow Charlie Thomas, the team star, and a black man to register. Rickey would say the humiliation of that player never left him. Inning 2 also recounts the start of the American League by Ban Johnson, who took the Western League East, changed its name, opened up in Boston, Philly, Baltimore, and Washington, and paid players $500 more per season. That got stars like Cy Young, Rube Waddell, and John McGraw to jump. But McGraw didn't last long in the American League. He feuded with Ban Johnson over being told how to play the game. So McGraw went back to the National League and joined the New York Giants, where he'd spend the next 31 years. As payback, he refused to play the Boston Pilgrims in the 1904 championship. We're also introduced to black baseball of the time and historic teams like the Kansas City Monarchs, the Cuban X-Giants, the New York Lincoln Giants, and many others. Two of the stars we're introduced to are John Henry Pop Lloyd, referred to as the Black Wagner, a comparison that the actual Honus Wagner took as a compliment. The other was Rube Foster, who, as the story goes, got his nickname by beating the great Rube Waddell in 1902. McGraw secretly hired Foster to teach the New York Giants, the pitching staff, teach them what he knew. We'll hear more from Rube Foster soon, as he had the great ambition to organize a league to rival the pro leagues. Inning 2 wraps with the retelling of the MERKLE Boner, which saw the Giants' hopes of winning the pennant lost to a base running blunder by Fred Merkle. Cubs would go on to win the pennant and the World Series, their last World Series, in fact, until 2016. The retelling of the accounts of that MERKLE Boner are done so well in the document that I would do a disservice if I tried to do it here. So go check it out if you aren't already familiar. We'll leave a link below. So that's it. Eric, let's hear from you first. What were your takeaways from inning 2?
I just love hearing about all the ball players back then. I know we have some interesting players nowadays with whether Yasiel Puig or Manny Ramirez, but back then, Three Finger Brown, Ty Cobb was completely just insane out there, ferocious, just kind of like Pete Rose, but even more crazy. The guy was out there. John McGraw, touched more on him. John McGraw is just nuts. Rube Foster, you talk about. There's Ed Doheny, who's absolutely, literally insane. He went to an insane asylum. So the ball players back then, and I think it mentioned how they weren't necessarily gentlemen or educated back then. It was just, baseball players were just whoever, needed a job and they could play, they got a job. So there was a lot of just insane personalities, and just thought it would be crazy to go watch a game. And even the crowd back then were nuts. They couldn't even finish games because they were running onto the field and fighting the players, and just an insane time. Would have been really been interesting to be able to watch and to see how that looked like, because you can't, it's hard to visualize.
Yeah, your comment about players just coming from out of the woodworks. Honus Wagner came from the Iron and Oil League. Walter Johnson came from the Idaho State League. They were coming from everywhere if they could play. And that's what a lot of this inning really focused on, were the players. You had the moment where they focused on the birth of the American League, which of course you had to, but so much of this was spent on players. Your comment about too the fans being a part of the game on the field. It's told many times, and it's included in that retelling of the MERKLE Boner of the Cubs at the initial game where Fred Merkle made the base running mistake. The fans were all over, and they were in the game. And then in the makeup game that they had to play, the one game playoff for the pennant, there were fights breaking out in the crowd. And the game had to be delayed because of all the fights. So the fans were, it was a totally different situation where you got grandstands, and you got walls, and you got netting, and you got everything that keeps the fans separate. It wasn't like that back then. Fans were in the middle of it almost. And some of these players we really were introduced to in this one, some fantastic players. And I did want to mention, because I hate how we know Ty Cobb and we know Honus Wagner. We know those guys because they were playing the professional game. They kept the stats. They had more media, newspapers and radio covering them. But I really wish that we could have known more about John Henry Pop Lloyd. After this was over, I went and did some research on him some more, and Babe Ruth referred to him as the greatest baseball player of all time at that point. And that's high praise coming from Babe Ruth. So wow. Big shout out to, and obviously he's long gone by now, but John Henry Pop Lloyd, the Black Honus Wagner, just from all accounts, phenomenal baseball player, but we don't even know that name. I think some of the big names that have come out of the Negro Leagues over the years, it's Satchel Paige, it's Josh Gibson, it's Cool Papa Bell, it's Buck O'Neill. But some of these guys are just lost in time, and that's, John Henry Pop Lloyd is one of them. Rube Foster, even though he will learn, I believe it'll be in the next inning that we watch, really gets the Negro Leagues going. That's something that kind of stands out to me, is that there's just so many stars that were in black baseball that we just don't know enough about, and they're lost in time because of that. So yeah, that sort of stood out to me. About the players, who do you got? We learned a lot about the Christian gentleman, Christy Mathewson. We learned a lot about Walter Johnson, two phenomenal pitchers. If you had to pick one, are you sticking with your Giants? Are you sticking with Mathewson? Who do you think is the best pitcher out of this era from everything we saw? What about Three Finger Brown? He's in there too, and the crazy Rube Waddell. Who do you got? Who do you got out of all that? There were a lot of great pitchers of this time, of this era.
Yeah, it's basically a toss up. They're all amazing. I guess Christy Mathewson, as a Giants fan, his name is out there on the outfield wall, so I've heard about him longer and studied him a little more. But that's not to say that he's better than Walter Johnson. He's obviously he's a nice guy. I think Walter Johnson was too, but so I guess I could take Christy Mathewson, but yeah, they're all great. Yeah,
it was that time was about pitching and speed, and that ruled the game. Not home runs, not power. That didn't come around until Babe Ruth made it popular to hit home runs. And once they and again, we'll get into this in a future episode, but once they changed what you could do to the ball, one of Mathewson's pitches was the spitball, and that was something you could doctor up the ball, you could mess up the ball, you could do whatever you wanted, you could make that thing look brown, black, purple. You could do whatever you wanted that thing. You could cut it. You could just destroy the baseball back at this time. So it was very hard for hitters to do their thing. And that almost makes what Wagner and Cobb and those guys did, don't you think, even more important, because that ball was just, a speck of dirt coming at him by the time it was ready for the game. And what do you think? I almost think that what Wagner and Cobb did would be even more remarkable than, say what Pete Rose did, 70 years later.
Yeah, they're hitting a ball they can't even see it. Probably I think they use the same ball unless they lose it.
Right.
If we went back then, we'd be just amazed at, the game was so much dirtier than, for lack of a better word, than it is now. That's all clean, and they change out the ball, goes in the dirt, change it out. Back then they went the whole game, and it was just, had to be crazy. And Ty Cobb is just absolute determination out there, and just he'll do whatever he had to do to get a hit, and he'll spike someone. He'll do whatever he had to do. And he even said, I believe in the documentary, that his batting average is about 50 points higher just based on the mental aspect of it. So it was absolutely crazy.
Yeah, he played as if everyone was out to get him, and he did. He made that comment about if he didn't have that same fire, that he would not have been who he was. Big shout out here to John Thorne, who is a historian and speaks a lot about Cobb, and had a lot of those sound bites, if you will, those quotes from Cobb from back then, because we learned a lot about Cobb. A lot of this episode is spent on Ty Cobb. I think that Ty Cobb, if you're a baseball historian, you probably put Cobb, a quick side note here, or a side tangent here. I mean, is Cobb top 5 all time, do you think? I mean, he's pretty close to being up there if he's not in it.
Like number 5, 6. Yeah, I think so. When I thought about the top 5 hitters of all time, I was doing a video research one time. I think I had him number 5, right up there, or 6 maybe, but it was close. Yeah.
If somebody did what he did today, 7 batting titles in a row, you just don't see that anymore. You see somebody pop in there for a year or two, and then they kind of dip back down to the sustainability of it. And again, in a pitcher's dominant league, he hit 366 lifetime. Didn't hit a ton of home runs, but to hit 366 in a 12 batting titles, 7 years in a row. Somebody I follow on Twitter put out, Blue Jays fan, what would be what would be the Blue Jays record that would be the hardest to top, and single season record. And the winner was John Olerud's single season batting average of 363. Well, Ty Cobb did 366 his entire lifetime.
Yep.
So it's really phenomenal. And
Insane.
that something like that puts it into perspective. That 366 lifetime average is just fantastic. Let's dive into some of our categories. We do like to give you guys our thoughts on some specific items. And the first one I'll toss to you of everything that we saw in episode 2. What's your time machine moment? And to the listeners who may be catching this for the first time, time machine moment is, what would you want to hop in your DeLorean or your Bill and Ted phone booth and head back to and watch in person firsthand? What would be your time machine moment from this second inning?
I guess of the first World Series. Did they cover that? I believe so, right? The 1903 World Series. Yeah, I mean, we're talking Cy Young, I believe, is in there. Honus Wagner, just to go check out the first World Series. And it's probably completely different than the World Series today, which is, cameras everywhere and a huge spectacle. It's probably, I'm sure there was a lot of people, but it had to be just completely different. I would have loved to go watch, the first World Series.
There were some great World Series in that first decade. The first one, the 1909 one, was Tigers and Pirates, and that was Cobb versus Wagner. And that was special because at that time, American League and National League didn't play each other. So you really never saw Cobb versus Wagner. Wagner outplayed Cobb in that World Series. Mine would be the 1905 World Series, and that was the Christy Mathewson World Series. 3 shutouts in 6 days. Yeah. Just to watch that pitching performance over a week would be fantastic. Steven Strasburg won the World Series MVP on 2 good starts. Mathewson with the best World Series pitching performance of all time. That would have been something to see. A close second to me would have just been to go see Honus Wagner play. From how he's described as the build of the man and everything, I think that he was one of the best all time, just to see him play. But the Mathewson 05 World Series would have been great. What is for you? The next category is the do-over moment. So we kind of look back again for the new viewers. We look back. What is the moment from inning 2 that if we could go back in time and just kind of have a chance to do something over, do something different? Did you have a main do-over moment from inning 2? Yeah.
Well, other than the obvious gentleman's agreement that was still going on, that's pretty much a do-over all the way up until it went away. Right. But other than that, I guess I go with the MERKLE boner, the stupid base running play. He's a 19-year-old kid. I'm a Giants fan too. So that could have been another chance for a championship. But the Giants did not win the pennant because MERKLE, a guy hits a base hit to bring in a run, and he's at first. Well, he doesn't touch second. He just runs into the dugout. So the Cubs find the ball somehow. If that was the right ball, they found a ball within the crowd. It was a crazy story. Touch second, MERKLE's out, and he's basically the Bill Buckner of 1908 or whatever year it was. So, and I feel bad mostly for him because he had to deal with that his whole life. Just like I feel bad for Bill Buckner. It's not right. These guys just get completely destroyed over a mistake. When it's a team sport. But so I would like that as a do-over, and hopefully, he touches second this time. Maybe the Giants win that game and go to the World Series. But even if not, at least he's spared the torture of having to deal with that his whole life.
Yeah, I'm too young, and I'm not that young. I'm 39, but I'm too young to know who was Bill Buckner before Bill Buckner. I have a feeling it was Fred Merkle. I have a feeling that Bill Buckner took that mantle, that place on the mantle from Fred Merkle for just, bad luck, bad play in baseball. And, the credit kind of has to be given to the Cubs on that side. Johnny Evers, and I think it was Evers. Who was it? Evers is the one who realized it, that he didn't touch second base. So the awareness of the Cubs infielder too in that situation, because the reason why Merkle doesn't touch second base is because the fans are rushing the field, and he's like, these game's over. He's running away. He's scared. But the fact that Cubs infielder Johnny Evers is like, he didn't touch the base. He's out if we can get that ball. And then there's this whole thing about how they have to go find the ball. The recounting of the story is fantastic. You have to check it out. But that's a good one. Mine is sort of along the lines of that gentleman's agreement. There was a moment in this where it speaks about how John McGraw tried to get Charlie Grant onto his 1901 Giants. Charlie Grant, black man, renamed him Charlie Takahoma in the hopes that it would he could pass as a Cherokee Indian, and it didn't fly. They found him out, and he didn't get in there. So there was one of the key figures in baseball, John McGraw, trying to get a black man on his roster because he wanted the best players, didn't care about the color of their skin. Did not work out at that time. That would be my do-over. And the last category is the standout from the episode. My standout was Daniel Okrent, and I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. The stories he had on Rube Waddell and Walter Johnson, and they used him at a pivotal moment in the documentary too. So they have that story about Branch Rickey, and it's a heavy story about how Charlie Thomas was not allowed to register at the hotel. And it was something that sort of sets it's a seed that they plant for later on when they're going to start talking about Branch Rickey and Jackie Robinson. So it's a heavy story that you almost feel, if you're watching the documentary, could lead into a whole, conversation on race and baseball. But instead, they use an interview from Daniel Okrent to transition to the Tinker to Evers to Chance Cubs. And the way that it's done from an editing standpoint and how Daniel is delivering the story, it actually, the transition kind of works from a heavy topic to more of a lighter topic, being those three Cubs. So my standout was Daniel, and the stories on Rube Waddell were great. We didn't really talk much about Rube in this one, but Rube was an absolute maniac. He'd be in a game, he'd hear fire sirens, and they'd have to hold him off from running away, chasing the fire engine. He was a nutcase. He had great stories on Waddell, great stories on Walter Johnson. So Daniel Okrent was my sort of standout from the interviews and everybody giving recounts of stories and everything. Did you have who was your standout from this one?
I didn't feel like anyone felt like they were kind of spread them out more thin. I didn't notice anyone who got a lot of time, but except for like you said. But I thought two of them I was going to mention are Buck O'Neil again. He was awesome. Anytime we hear him, he's just great at telling stories, and I just love Buck O'Neil. And also Vin Scully made a couple appearances. So anytime, got to give respect to Vin Scully. He was awesome and always has great stories and great insight. Even though I'm a Giants fan, I do like Vin Scully. So yeah. So
Vin's great.
Those are my two guys.
Cool, man. I think we're good on inning 2. That's everything. Unless you have any final thoughts. Thanks for joining again for inning 2. Thanks for having me and having me on your channel, hosting me. I appreciate it.
No problem. Thanks for coming on Home Baby Baseball, talking about inning number 2, and make sure everybody go check out Ballcap Sports, subscribe over there so you also catch inning 3 and other baseball and sports talk over there. So appreciate you coming on. I guess we'll talk to you later.